This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning. You're listening to Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. We have a fantastic show lined up for you today. We have with us the author of the book, Who You Are is How You Lead, Rachel Rider. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share a little bit about you with listeners who might not be familiar with your work. Rachel had founded MettaWorks in 2015 after a distinguished career in HR, receiving executive coaching certification from Columbia University. And then the book that we're talking about today, Who You Are is How You Lead, the way that it's described in the book, you explain the first relationship any leader must work on is the only one they have with themselves. And this insight packed psychology infused book, Ryder shares how she's helped hundreds of business leaders at companies like GitHub and Okta become high functioning and self optimized by identifying and rewiring unhelpful patterns of behavior and training them to prioritize relationship building. Ooh, okay, that's a mouthful. So I'll stop right there. Again, welcome to the show. And is there anything about yourself that you'd like to share with listeners, maybe outside of the bio, so that we can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. I'm an executive coach. I run a coaching firm, and we work with fairly high-powered leaders, and they're usually at the height of their careers, and they are struggling to enjoy their success or trust the teams that they've built, or just managing the day-to-day issues of where they are. And the thing that really distinguishes us from the industry is that we really pay attention to the whole, the mind, body, and spirit in the work, which actually creates the true change. And so that's what the book is starting to talk about, which is how do you look at the whole picture? And that whole picture starts with you.
And when you wrote this book, what was the why did you sit down and write this book?
That's a great question. I asked myself that too, because as I was writing it, I was postpartum, I would say 2 weeks with my second son. We were moving, and I was thinking, what is important to me about this? Because it actually felt like it came from within. And the coaching I do is a very privileged resource, and it is very private. I work with very high powered leaders behind closed doors because it's uncomfortable for leaders to be able to ask for help publicly. And so I thought it was really vital to be able to share the work we were doing and make it accessible to those who might not be behind closed doors with me. And so that's what this book really does is it pulls a curtain behind these conversations and provides tools that you can start as a reader to really start delving in yourself if you are not sure if you want to work with a coach yet, or you're not sure where to begin.
I love it. I love it. That's a good answer. As far as, especially with the writing process there, that's if it felt like it came from within, that's a great place. One of those books that need to be written there.
Mm.
And there's tons of leadership books out there. Traditional executive coaches ask things like, what's important to you? What are your top goals? What are the roadblocks? How does the method you describe and who you are is how you lead differ from those approaches?
So, such a great question. I appreciate that because we really do distinguish ourselves in the industry in the way we bring in the body's nervous system. I'm trained as a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a 3-year intensive training actually for trauma. I don't work with folks in trauma, but the same rules apply when navigating the nervous system. When something in your brain is telling you, I don't want to be doing this anymore, and yet you keep doing it, that's a great sign that it is held in your viscera. It's this habitual behavior on the neurological level. And so what we do is we work at the neurological level. And so that's what this book starts to talk about is how do you access that? How do you tap into that? And so, yes, we care about your big picture goals. Yes, we care. We want to see a change in behavior. However, our premise is that your change in behavior will happen when we help you work at the body level and we bring in the mind. And then, of course, there's the spirit piece. And so, when all those three are aligned, that's when the power of change is real and you can step into actually who you want to be.
I love it. I love it. That's definitely a different approach than what you hear quite a bit. And I say we have to outsource our trauma analysis, but having having that into as an approach for leadership or starting with kind of the executive coaching, I think it's a good way to come about it. Um, how about once one gets into a leadership position, executing tasks is no longer a key part of the job. Interpersonal skills become much more central. Why does excelling in relationships require one to first look within?
Mm. So let me just create a clear reason why first that executing at that level is not what's needed. When you are at this most senior level of leadership, you are so far removed from the day-to-day tasks that it's vital you trust your people to do it and you are not doing it yourself. When you do it yourself, you become the bottleneck. You also create confusion. You disempower the people you've hired for you. There's a number of reasons why you need to pull out of the weeds. But you can't pull out of the weeds if you don't trust the people who are working for you, if you don't have a strong rapport, if you don't trust that they're going to feel comfortable coming to you when mistakes are made or issues arise. And so really your new deliverable as a leader becomes your relationship with that person, because the better your relationship with that person, the more effective they're going to be at their role, which is what you really need. And so then what that means is you need to be fluent in who you are, have an understanding of what drives you. When do you get in your own way? The clearer you are on your own internal landscape, the better you are able to manage how you show up with others, to regulate yourself when you're in the room with someone you're feeling frustrated by. Because when you show up effectively, other people want to work with you. You can think of it as, oh, it's manipulative to get what I need from people. But I would actually say when there's a deeper connection and not someone's not being manipulated, but someone truly feels excited to work with you, feels deeply loyal, oh my God, that's an asset on your team.
I love it. I love it. I think we've all worked in the past for some boss or leader who, has hired you for a role, but then didn't give you the trust to be, to actually
Yeah.
empower you to do what you were hired to do. So, you talked about um, really that relationship, that trust, and I imagine knowing what drives you first before being able to do that. um, that is a different different perspective than that person that we were just describing, right?
Yeah.
um, Work is where your demons go to hide. This is one of the things that you said in the book here. This is an unusual thing to hear from an executive coach. Can you explain what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's been really clear narrative around why therapy is so important, why it's so helpful to speak to someone when you're encountering some issues in your life. Very rarely do people talk about that when you show up in a certain way in the workplace, you can be alienating others, you can be detrimental to your own success because of how you're communicating, because of the way you manage your anger, because of your own anxiety when you use your voice. Very few people are talking about the fact that how you are managing your own inner life and your own inner demons actually is really important in how you show up at work. Now, the reason why your demons go to hide at work is because no one's looking for them at work. They're doing their personal stuff at the therapist's office. And so when they come to work, it's like, well, I just got to show up, get my day done, and come home. And in fact, actually, that's where the demons really love to stay and sleep and hide, because they know they're not going to be found. But if you're doing your work with your therapist, you need to assume that that kind of stuff is infiltrating your work life. As an executive coach, I'm not your therapist. What I'm here to do is help you understand how you're showing up in your inner world, and those demons you may have may be leaking out into impacting your professional experience. And so that may be you get really angry and frustrated very easily and you raise your voice, and that's alienating others. Or that may be you have some self-confidence issues and so you don't speak up, or you say yes all the time. And so now no one relies on you because you say yes and don't deliver. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying demons go to hide, because you're not on the lookout for them at work.
I love it. I love it. These are all very real issues for people who have, all of us really, anybody who has relationships at work, right? You coming from an HR background, what we call interpersonal skills, or what we call soft skills, right? Having to have this conversation with the CEO, soft skills. But this is some of the most important thing for people who are really high performers to be able to do that. Is it possible to teach business leaders interpersonal skills? Aren't there some people who just don't play well with others?
Are there? Um, I mean, I love to answer this question in that anyone who wants to change, anyone who cares about how they show up and impact others can change, can have a positive impact, especially when they're authentic to themselves. I really believe that you can have remarkably strong interpersonal relationships at work as long as you care about it. But if someone doesn't care, there might be some people who just interpersonally aren't great, but that's because they don't care, not because they're incapable of it. And I want to acknowledge that there's a neurological spectrum here. And I'm not an expert on a typical neurological ways of showing up. And I do believe that even in those circumstances, you can show up well in the workplace in honoring who you are.
Love it. So one, you have to care,
Yeah.
and the people who don't get into that scope, right? The ability's there.
Yeah.
In each of us, there, that ability is there. Now, you weave your personal and your professional narrative throughout this book, including how you juggled your career with being a mom, how your childhood dynamics played out in your leadership style, and how you overcame the physical ailment that you suffered due to stress. Why was that important for you to do?
The book includes, every chapter is a client session and a client specific story. And that felt really important so that folks could understand how to apply the tenets of the book and how they manifest in the workplace. With that being said, I thought it was really helpful to add my story so that it drove home the point that A, these tenets can translate outside of our professional life as well, and B, allows the reader to understand I've practiced these over and over again in my life and seen a change. And so that the reader really has access to different ways these tenets can show up in your life and really help and impact you in a different way. And I think that the story of the client, as well as my own story, become a really beautiful, compelling cocktail of how to play with and experiment with these tools yourself.
I love it. I know when I'm reading a book, if it's just, I'm actually in the process of writing a nonfiction book right now. And the idea is if your style is where you're just listing out kind of the ideas and that sort of thing, the stories really pull us in. So the fact that you have real life stories and kind of the examples of the client sessions, people can see that and say, okay, well, here's these principles in action, right? Now, you've been working with anti-racism coach for years. Can you explain what insights you've gleaned from that work that now inform your coaching? How has that come over to your coaching?
Yeah, we've actually, not only do I work with her one-on-one, but we do twice a year we run a team anti-racism workshop, and we just had our second one for the year last week. So this is really fresh in terms of the way this integrates into the coaching. I am a white woman of quite a lot of privilege. And in my anti-racism work, it's becoming clear to me that whiteness carries a lot of presumptions and tenets within it that if I'm not aware of, I am perpetuating in my coaching. And that feels really inappropriate for me because I work with leaders, frankly, across the globe and across all races, even within the United States. So the idea of not examining my own perpetuation of whiteness feels irresponsible. And so some of the ways that I've been really examining this within myself and for a team are looking at things like perfectionism and expectations of urgency. And there's a tenet in the whiteness pillar that's unspoken often, which is a right to comfort. As a white person, I have the right to be comfortable in any circumstance, even when we're having a difficult conversation. One of the things I've been looking at in terms of my own coaching is that for years I've been working with leaders to help them speak in difficult conversations and put their people at ease, with the presumption that everyone should be comfortable even in a difficult conversation. That's a great example of me perpetuating a whiteness idea that maybe isn't necessarily true and doesn't have to be. And so an example of this anti-racism work within myself and within our firm is to really continue to look at how have I internalized whiteness within myself and then perpetuating it within my coaching. And I would say, I don't think there's you pass the test or a mountaintop to complete. I think this is a lifetime of work, but work that's really important to me in being a phenomenal coach and also helping to change the world a little.
I love it. I love it. I know it's been about 20 years since I've been in the corporate workplace. But even being able to have a conversation like this with companies is super important. Whether it's gender, whether it's race. What about age? Do you find that maybe older generations have a hard time understanding some of this? Is there any correlation there between generation or age?
I don't want to make any
Mass
generalization.
generalizations, I know.
What I would say from my own experience is we try to mostly work with folks who are interested in looking at themselves. And that doesn't matter the age or race. And when a leader comes to us, the presumption is they're here to examine themselves. And so whatever preconceptions they come with, the assumption is that we are here to help them examine and explore them and maybe challenge them. And so I think that whoever we're working with, whatever preconceptions they come with, there's a presumption that we're going to try to look at them and see what really holds true for them, what honors their authentic self, and what's simply perpetuating social conditioning that may not be so helpful.
I love it. Well, just the idea of even having those conversations. I'm dating myself, but 20 years back, it would be very hard to even approach some of those
Yeah,
topics. So just people
yeah.
raising their hand and saying, "Okay, I want to have those conversations," is definitely sound. And if that's integrated in this, that's fantastic, really. Now you're very clear to note that you're not a psychologist. I mean, we kind of there's some overlap here, but or a therapist, but rather a high level executive coach. But your approach does lean heavily into personal growth, emotional baggage, and lifelong patterns of behavior. Can you explain where that line is drawn and how you avoid crossing it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this can get confusing for folks, especially when we're doing deep work in executive coaching. I'm very clear that I am not a trauma specialist. I may have been trained in how to navigate that, so I know how to tell when it's arising. And that's when I'll say, let's make sure that you're talking to someone about this. And so a specific example that I can tell you is, I was working with a client recently who was really activated and agitated by someone on their team who worked for them. And it was confusing for him because he was like, I'm in charge. Why is this so disruptive to me? And through our work and our sessions together, he uncovered that, oh, this employee reminds me of my father. It stirs old stuff up. And so in that moment, we made sure that he could bring that to his therapist. What is really still unfinished about his father that needs attending to? So that piece about examining his relationship with his father goes to his therapist. What our role is to help him understand how the person working for him is not his father. And so I'm working with the professional context so that he can take his personal context, trauma, and examination of that with his therapist. And I'll tell you, I love working with someone who has a therapist, working with someone who has a spiritual teacher, because that becomes such a powerful combination. It means that they're approaching the struggles on every side of the spectrum, and so that real change can happen. So I'm really supportive of having a therapist as well as a coach.
I love it. A lot of the things that you touched upon, the trauma, it's, let's see, I just got finished reading a book by Peter Attia, which is mostly physical health and living to be 100. But the very end of the book, he brings back, no, the most important thing is getting past those trauma that, working on yourself. So it's when you hear these things in multiple, it's just kind of neat when stuff kind of syncs up like that. The book, Who You Are is How You Lead, the author, Rachel Rider. Rachel, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
That knowing the inner landscape of ourselves is a lifetime of work, and that it can be fun, and that just doing a little has a huge impact. And so check out the book, take a look and see what you might be able to do today to really shift the course of something in your life.
I love it. And we're right here at the end of the show. For listeners who'd like to find out more about you, what is the best place for them to go?
My firm is called MettaWorks, METTAWORKS. So you can check us out at mettaworks.io. That's METTAWORKS.io.
Perfect. Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you
Have
for
a good one.
having me. You too.